The first time I spotted that polished SUV crawling down our hunting track, I swore I must be dreaming, because nobody, absolutely nobody, used that narrow ribbon of earth as a vehicle lane. It wasn't a road on any map, not even acknowledged in HOA documents, just a family thoroughfare etched into the woods by generations of sweat and tool work, intended for hunting boots and the occasional battered pickup in season. Not some gleaming status mobile with chrome that screamed entitlement. Before I get deeper into this mess, tell me where you're reading from. I'm curious how far this little saga will travel. Now back to the beginning. I've lived here long enough that the back trail behind my house feels like a piece of my own skin. My grandfather carved the first line through the saplings with an axe. My father kept it passable with a tired tractor, and I treated it as refuge when the world got loud. So when Stephen Carver slid into the neighborhood 6 months ago and bought one of those ostentatious corner mansions, he didn't arrive politely. He came in like a man planting a flag. Within weeks he had elbowed his way onto the HOA board, begun parading around in a reflective vest stamped HOA inspection, and learned to quote regulations with the solemnity of scripture, inventing rules that sounded suspiciously homemade. His first complaints were aesthetic. My fence allegedly failed some invisible standard. Then my mailbox offended his suburban sensibilities. But the real affront came one crisp morning when I was skinning a deer and heard tires chewing through brittle leaves. I looked up as his SUV flattened one of my turkey decoys as if it were roadkill, the glass window parting to reveal slicked back hair, a smug grin, and a clipboard balanced like armor on his steering wheel, and he intoned, "This falls under HOA jurisdiction, Clause 12.4. Green corridors must be accessible for utility review," as if he'd unearthed a holy writ. I stood there, deer legs still in my hands, and told him flatly this was private land and he was trespassing. He smirked, sunglasses hiding his eyes, told me to submit an application if I wished to keep using the path, warned it might be repurposed otherwise, and drove off with opera music trailing behind him like a mocking fanfare. Outraged, I stomped down to the HOA office that afternoon to confront Karen Whitfield, the president, expecting an ally who understood property and history, only to be deflected by her placating shrug. Stephen was only very dedicated to community safety, she said, and besides, technically the HOA could review land within its boundaries for future planning, and I should be grateful for his vigilance. In that moment I realized the system wasn't merely indifferent to history, it was stacked against anyone who didn't own a corner mansion. That night I skipped supper, poured a measure of bourbon, and lit a welding torch. By midnight I'd fabricated something ugly and deliberate. A concealed tire trap, crude and vicious, a frame of steel spikes set just below the leaf litter where a vehicle's weight would find them and a gullible driver would not. The following morning I sat on my porch with coffee and watched the world, waiting for round two. It came sooner than I expected. The distant rumble of an expensive vehicle approaching like an animal with no memory of boundaries. Opera booming out of the sunroof. Stephen hunched over his clipboard as if composing his next decree. Then the inevitable sound. Thud, crack, a metallic shriek, and the luxury vehicle's front tires shredded in perfect, catastrophic simultaneity, the rear dropping, rims grinding, sparks flying like a cheap 4th of July, the SUV careening, collapsing into a sorry heap right in front of my steps. Stephen tumbled out, flapping and furious, shouting about sabotage and criminality while I took a slow sip of coffee and suggested maybe the land was telling him something. Red-faced and indignant, he counted the cost of his ruined rubber, vowed lawyers and lawsuits, and paced, phone pressed to his ear repeating the word lawsuit like a charm. He even crouched and took pictures of the disturbed leaves as though they were criminal evidence. I told him, calmly and with as much restraint as I could muster, that the track had been in my family for 3 generations and he had no rightful place there. He jabbed a finger at me and barked that Karen and the HOA would back him, that I couldn't go around burying traps like some lunatic, but I pointed out the obvious. Driving across private property without permission is trespass, and named the statute by which he'd overstepped, which seemed to rattle him because he suddenly had fewer ready words. After his tantrum and some sulking by his ruined vehicle, a tow arrived, the driver shrugging and muttering something like, "Someone did not want you up here," and Stephen left with one last murderous glare while I watched, thinking, you're right, it's only just beginning. Predictable as a bad novel, Stephen came back swinging with paperwork, an envelope taped to my door announcing his intent to sue, accusing me of creating a hazardous environment and seeking $15,000 for willful destruction of his luxury tires, and 2 days later a second letter appeared bearing Karen's signature, asserting HOA authority over access easements and berating me to remove unauthorized landscaping hazards or face fines. In their world, the ancestral hunting trail had been reduced to a sidewalk project waiting to happen. I refused to swallow that, hired a property lawyer who almost choked on his coffee reading their claims, and then reassured me, no, they had no standing. The trail was mine and defensive measures against trespassers were within my rights under state law. Pointing at the relevant statutes that made the legal picture clear, the inevitable confrontation occurred. When Stephen and Karen marched up my drive together, Karen clutching her clipboard as if it were a legal sword while she announced I'd be paying for Stephen's SUV and warned that the HO would back every cent of his claim, and I, folding my arms, told her she'd made a mistake because I had already filed trespassing charges, and unlike her make-believe HOA edicts, those filings carried legal teeth. Before she could sputter indignantly, a county deputy cruiser rolled up, because of course Stephen had phoned the sheriff in an attempt to paint himself as the injured party, and the deputy listened to both sides with a kind of patient silence that makes liars shrivel, examined my documentation, and then spoke plainly. The land belonged to me, the posted notices were legal, and driving past them was trespass, plain and simple, and when trespass damages property the law doesn't hand out sympathy, it assigns liability. Karen tried to insist HOA rules trumped everything, but the deputy cut her off and started writing citations. Within a week both Stephen and Karen found themselves facing criminal trespass charges. Stephen was ordered to pay the tow and repair costs, and Karen's tenure as HOA president crumbled when the board voted her out for needlessly embroiling the community in litigation. He lost his SUV, she lost her power, and I retained the land that had been my family's refuge for decades. Sometimes the sweetest vindication isn't revenge you engineer, it's watching petty authority and entitlement implode under the weight of their own arrogance. If you've liked this HOA saga so far, hit like and subscribe because the drama only gets richer from here.